curriculum design, designing courses, making changes. And I've chosen this topic because understanding language curriculum design is just as important for every individual language teacher as it is for someone working in a ministry or a department, working at a provincial or state or national level. And it's important because through understanding and applying the process of language curriculum design, we're able to deliver courses that better meet the needs of our learners and that help us to be more effective in what we are doing. So what I propose to do is to give a case study. It's going to be a bit of a story, a bit of a narrative, and the purpose of the case study is to illustrate the process of language curriculum design. And then I'm going to give a few short examples from my own experience of how we can apply this knowledge in our own classrooms. So in the examples, I'm going back to my own language teaching in classrooms. So I hope this will be of some interest and value to you. I recognise, of course, as you've probably noticed, that I'm not American. I've never worked in the American education system, so I'm really taking quite an international focus, and the examples are going to be somewhat international. But I hope they will be interesting to you, and you will see some applicability to your own context and own situations. Okay, let's get started. So, the story. The story begins with a telephone. This actually is very similar to the telephone that I'm talking about. So I was sitting in my office here in Wellington, and I came into my office, and you know, this is one of those phones where you have a message where the little red light starts flashing. You know, this is starting to get old technology, but you know, still what we have in our offices here in Wellington, although they are taking the phones away from us. So anyway, so this red light was flashing, and I picked up the phone and I put in my code and I listened to the message, and I didn't understand what was being said. It was a very broken phone line. It was a very garbled message. So I thought, I don't know what this is about. So I just deleted it. And then a few days later, the phone rang again, and it was the same person calling back. And what it was someone who had read a book I'd co-authored and was interested in talking to me about a curriculum design project. And after a bit of conversation and probably some exchange of emails, I agreed to be part of the project. And what was the project? Well, here we are. So ABC is the company. And what they explained was they had recently been engaged in a 9-month technical program and asked to lead a 180-hour ELT program over 6 months for young Saudis with no prior English language experience. And this is one of those projects that Matt referred to in his introduction. Anyway, so here I was in my office in Wellington thinking, where do I start? Oh, wow. This is a challenge. Because when it came down to, you know, what did I know about Saudi Arabia? If we were in a more interactive setting, I'd probably get you to do a little exercise here, but you're just going to have to listen to me talk, sorry. So probably like many of you, you know, what do I associate with Saudi Arabia? Well, I knew a few facts. I knew that the capital was Riyadh. I knew about the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina. I knew there was a lot of sand and desert in Saudi Arabia. And of course I knew about the oil industry. And that was it. That was all I knew. I found out that the project was based. You can probably see there's a small island offshore here. So it was down here, right on the southern, the border with Yemen. So this is the part of the country that the project was based in. Anyway, so I'm starting from a total information void. I know nothing. So what do I do? Well, I suppose in language teaching terms, what I did was to apply the KWL approach, which is, I'm guessing you might be familiar with it, but if you're not, so the K is what do I know? I've already told you what I knew at the start about Saudi Arabia. The W is what do I want to know? What do I want to learn? And the L is what have I learned? So obviously when it came to the W, I had many, many questions. What did I want to know? A great deal. How did I go about finding out about it? Well, if I wanted to use a fancy name and try to impress you, I would say that I was doing document analysis. But the reality was I was sitting at my desk, at my computer, using the university library, but also those other tools beloved of scholars nowadays, Google and Google Scholar. And I was typing in certain keywords, words like in combination, words like Saudi, adult learner, elementary learner, and trying to find what I could that had been published and so on, to give me a better idea of the context. So the next few slides, I'm going to be sharing with you I guess the L part of that KWL. So the L being, what did I learn? What did I learn? So I learned stuff about the situation. So as I said at the outset, this was a project to prepare young Saudi men for working in the construction industry. And I have to confess that it took me a while to remind myself that it was the construction industry. Because I had this very strong association in my head between Saudi Arabia and oil, I kept on thinking they were going to be working in the oil industry. It took me quite a few days to actually remember that it was the construction industry. Anyway, one of the things I found out that was very interesting, I thought, was that in Saudi Arabia there was very high cell phone use and ownership. And the other point, which I mentioned before, is that the course was designed for 180 hours over 6 months. Now, I'm not sure what you or how you react to that piece of information, but I think the key thing to take away is this: it is not a lot of time. If you think about it, we know that from research that you need around 200 hours of more intensive instruction than this to go at half a band on something like the IELTS test. So 180 hours over 6 months, not a lot of time. Anyway, what else did I learn? I didn't learn a great deal about the learners because they hadn't yet been recruited. But so this was based on very limited information. But I understood that they would have limited formal education and that they might not be very motivated to learn English. We probably all had students who aren't motivated. But and you can ask yourself, why would you expect these young men to be motivated? They live in the south of Saudi Arabia. Arabic is the national language. There's probably not a lot of need for English in their daily lives. It might be worth mentioning that this project was a national top-down initiative. So the government had decided that they wanted more Saudis working in the construction industry because it was, from memory, at least 95% foreign nationals working in the industry. and the government wanted to increase the Saudi participation in this workforce. So I guess the point there is that it's not as though Saudi youth were clamoring to be working in the construction industry. This was something the government was trying to achieve. Something else I learned was about the teachers. So I had much more detailed information here because I had their CVs to look at. So they were all foreign teachers, and they were extremely varied in experience and qualification. If I'm honest, if I had been employing these teachers, not many of them would have got an interview. But I had no control over that. I had been hoping that they would be Arabic speakers, because obviously if you're talking about teaching beginners, you need to be able to use the first language in the classroom in a monolingual situation like this. But only one of these was a native Arabic speaker. So that was slightly disappointing. Today I won't talk about how this led to decisions about course books, but obviously when I looked at the experience and qualifications of the teachers, it was clear that having a decent course book, something to unify them, was going to be really important. Okay, so I've been doing the KWL, and to switch now to the language of curriculum design, what I've been talking about here is what we often call environment analysis. So some people might call it situation analysis, but the term I prefer is environment analysis. And you can see in this circle that is divided into 3 segments. And this is the segments I've been talking about the learners, the teachers, and the actual situation. So the key point here is that when we're trying to analyze the environment that a course is going to be taught in, we should try to get information about all 3. Why? Well, because it's important and you need to take account of it. So when we think about the information I've just been sharing, the question might be, so how do you respond to this information? What do you do with it? So in the technical language of environment analysis and curriculum design, we sometimes talk about these factors as constraints. I always think it's a slightly odd word. It seems quite negative, but the point is that when you've got these constraints, you have a choice. So you can either choose to work with a constraint or work against it. So in other words, there are some things that you cannot change. So for example, the fact that there are 180 hours is something that you cannot change. So with the examples I've just given, so the time factor is something you can't change, so you've got to try and work against it to overcome it. Whereas a factor like very high cell phone use is a constraint that you can work with. So what do I mean? So to overcome the constraint, to work against the constraint of time, the obvious thing would be to say, okay, how can we promote out-of-class learning to increase the time that the students spend learning the language or engaging with the language? And you think, oh, well, I could give them homework, but homework is so boring. And no one ever does homework properly. But then if you think, okay, the literature says that these young men will be very high users of cell phones. So when you think about out-of-class learning, think, okay, how can we take advantage of high use of cell phones? Let's use language learning apps.